that this film, making this film, changed every preconception I had about memory and the role of memories in our lives. It allowed me to imagine a time when I could possibly forget ever being in Edinburgh, or ever giving this Q&A with you, or ever making this film, or frankly, imagine a time I might one day forget that I was ever a filmmaker. I also probably would have said something to the effect that this film is the culmination of decades and decades of family connection and family kinship, that this is not a film I would have made about anyone else in my life, except Edwin Honig, who was, as you saw from the film, was a cousin of mine, a friend of mine, and in many ways was my mentor on a lot of levels. And throughout the making of this film, I always kept in both the back of my mind, but also in the forefront of my thoughts, one of Edwin's credos throughout the time I knew him, which was that good poetry, good art, but even good poetry, should always get to the bottom of things, to the heart of the matter, should touch people in their souls. And that was something, as I said, I made the film in a way in Edwin's spirit. And in a way, I always felt somehow that he had taught me throughout our relationship, in some ways, how to make the film. And then finally I would have said that I was with Edwin the day that he agreed to donate his brain to science for Alzheimer's research and study. And for a variety of reasons, that never happened, unfortunately actually, but that I'd like to think that this film preserves dimensions of Edwin's mind, which in many ways is equally as valid for study of Alzheimer's and ways of thinking about Alzheimer's and memory and forgetting in ways that we otherwise wouldn't and usually don't. And having got my introduction out of the way, if there are any questions from anyone, I'm happy to talk. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
I have a question, if I may.
Go for it.
I wondered how you came to terms with, obviously Edwin's sister in the film talks about, her difficulty with you filming him in the state that he was in, I guess. You must have had kind of moral dilemmas around that, did you?
Well, I wouldn't say I had moral dilemmas. I knew it was an issue, but I didn't have a conflict. And I didn't have a conflict for many reasons. First of all, the history and depth of my relationship with Edwin, that was the first thing. I mean, Edwin, I say to Edwin at the end of the film, you spent your whole life trying to change the way people understand life, try to understand what it means to be human. And so he's still doing so, right up until the very end. Edwin was a poet, capital P, poet. And as someone who studied the lives of poets, taught the lives of poets, breathed the life of a poet, he understood how the biography from the birth to death of a poet is both part of their work, and they never stopped teaching us about life. Edwin knew that poets were special citizens in our culture. They teach us, they make the invisible visible, they're beacons of truth. They shine light in dark corners and difficult corners of human frailty and human understanding. And I was really close to this guy, and he's my family member. Lila's little admonition at the beginning, in a way, was pure kind of sisterly talk, as much as anything else. If Lila had her way, I would have made a hagiography of Edwin, the title of which would have been My Brother, the Great Poet. She's just protecting her brother's legacy in a way, And once I explained to her, she lives in Colorado, halfway across the country. I explained, Edward and I discussed all this before we began. We didn't exactly know how things were going to end, if you will. But, this was an understanding, a connection that Edward and I had. And, I knew Edwin's work. For God's sakes, but a good deal of his work somehow was presciently, descriptive of what would ultimately happen to him, which is Edwin had things to teach us from the beginning to the end of the process of making this film. And I saw my role, just like Edwin was a translator, I saw my role as a translator. You know? And then I understood that it's not me that's translating, I'm not the translator, but in a way memory is the translator. And you know, like all of my films, this is a labor of love with someone I deeply loved and who I had a very special rapport with. And you know, but still, as a filmmaker, as an artist, that's what I do. I'm looking for special opportunities in life that present themselves very rarely to really get to the heart of what it means to be human. You know, that's what I do. That's my job.
You do it very well.
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, thank you, but you know.
Do we have questions yet? Do you need
the mic or shall
I just speak loudly?
I'll project mine.
I'll walk 3 steps closer.
Why did you feel it was important to bring in the story of his relationship with his adopted children?
Right.
Did he talk about this when he's met? Did he express it in his poetry and his writing? And how do you connect it to this idea of memory? Why was it important?
Yeah. Well, I'll try to give your question in my answer without repeating everything. Edwin had 3 griefs in his life. The death of Charlotte, his first wife. Oh, forgive me, wrong order. The death of Stanley, his younger brother. The death of Charlotte, his first wife. And his divorce and estrangement from his children. You couldn't know Edwin without knowing about the Stanley story, the death of his brother, because that was that pathos was an aura around him. You know, Charlotte happened. She died in the 40s, so that's a long time ago. But I'm sorry, he met her in the 40s. She died in the late 60s, early 70s, but he married her in the 40s. But the thing with his sons, he talked about it, but didn't want to talk about it a lot. It was a big, with a lot of people, he avoided this subject. What I wanted to say is, I thought I was making, but interestingly enough, why I included it, because, as I said in my quasi-introduction, Edward was a poet, and he knew very well that everything about the lives of a poet, the life of a poet, is important to the work, and it's important to understanding a life, the meaning of a life. You know, Edwin was a flawed character, but at the same time, in giving the full cycle to his story, you see how the way he treated his children was in a way a recapitulation of how he himself was treated as a young boy. So there's a circularity to that, which is a cautionary tale for all of us. You know, the other thing is that I think when I'm beginning this film that I'm making a film about memory and someone who's losing his memory. But one of the little epiphanies that I'm having throughout the course of making it is that I'm making a film about memory around, through, and with someone who has a lot that he needs to forget. So I'm thinking as I'm making the film now that this film isn't really about remembering. It's about forgetting and the power of forgetting, and how Alzheimer's is one kind of forgetting, but how in the deeper context of what Edwin needs to forget, there's something merciful in that. There's something that might even have to do with survival, psychological and emotional survival. You know? Then, on another level, bringing his sons into the picture as family members, okay, who gave me the gift of their participation, maybe I'm giving them something here as well, which is, what do you do with someone who has caused you pain, but who cannot remember what they did? And because they can't remember what they did, they can't say they're sorry. What do you do with that? And maybe, maybe in that way, there's something, I'll use the word cathartic, but I'm even thinking deeper than cathartic, in which they have to forgive him because he can no longer say he's sorry. And so with his death, they can perhaps, or even earlier than that, they can perhaps let go of their anger and their pain and move on. You know, we're still in the process of this. The film is not yet a year old, and Daniel, in fact, I'm going to screen the film in San Francisco in July, and he'll be seeing the film for the first time, and we'll be able to, pardon me, address and engage that very question. You know, Margot saw the film in New York, and was very, very pleased with the film for its truth and its honesty. And I also know, because she said so to me, that she really knows and hopes that when she knows that when the boys see it, when her sons see it, it's going to have a profound impact for them, in a good way, because they're only in the film through her. They're in the film through her encouragement. By the way, can I just interrupt 1 second? There are two people here in the room who I also would have, if I had given my Q&A without giving the introduction as part of the Q&A, I would have introduced, as part of the beginning of my Q&A, I would have introduced Sherry Spiegel, who's the co-producer of the film. Sherry, stand up. Also happens to be my wife. And also, if you haven't noticed, this little boy coming in the room, here and there, here and there. Eli, where are you? Eli Berliner, stand up. Take a bow. Okay. Please, anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first, thank you for the film. It's really, I love it, and it's really, and I first want to tell you that I don't know if you were there, because I'm from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro,
Yeah.
and the film was there in April, and all of my friends, like people I work with, everyone loved the film. They were writing Facebook so the people could go. So I just wanted to tell you, I don't know if you were there, because I couldn't go when I was there, so now I just finally...
You flew from Rio just to be in Edinburgh? No, that's very kind, thank you. I was actually in Sao Paulo and Rio, but there were several screenings in Rio. I was only there for one of them.
Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that.
Well, thank
and
you.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's about your process.
Sure.
Like, I know in the film you can see a little bit of it, but I wanted to know how you said that you decided to do the film talking to him, but then, like, how long did it take? I mean, for how long have you shot it there? And about the editing, I was very curious if you were like shooting and think about how you would do the structure of the film, or you did everything afterwards. Because I mean, I don't know, I'm watching thinking why did it do that, or so I was curious about the process, shooting and editing and the time.
Sure. The film was shot over a 5-year period, but the best conversation that I had with Edwin, unfortunately I didn't have a camera, was the first conversation that I had with him when I went to visit him, and told him actually that I was, all my films in many ways are about memory, and I was going to make another film about memory, or a portrait of somebody else who had what the scientists, neurologists call superabundant personal memory, a woman in California, and it didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And so, I always went to Edwin and showed him cuts of my films, and we talked about my films, and I went to visit him, and interesting enough, I had memory on the brain, if you can imagine, and I saw and we discussed that he was losing his, and so in that conversation we had a wonderful conversation, but I was just visiting him without a camera. But subsequent to that, I went to visit him every few months over the course of 5 years. And the thing is this, I logged the material and looked at the material, but I didn't edit anything. Until about 2010, I realized Edwin, let me just back up to say, Edwin is my cousin. So I know his father lived till he was 95, and his grandfather, who's my great-grandfather, lived till he was 96. And so I thought Edwin was going to live a long time. I mean, 91, he died in May, he's born in September. He died, 4 or 5 months before his 92nd birthday. I thought he was going to live a long time, and I thought, gee, what am I going to do? This film could go on shooting for a very long time, and I was going to stay with it through the end, I imagine. And so in 2010, I decided, just because I had all this material. I decided I wanted to make a film, or something, do something with it. So I made a short film called Translating Edwin Honig, A Poet's Alzheimer's. It's 19 minutes, it's in 6 parts, and I've only screened it at 2 film festivals in the world. The New York Film Festival, which had its world premiere, and then, well, what happened, the HBO in the United States saw the film, the short film, at that festival, and then told me that they wanted to help me make the long film. But they said, we don't want to show the short film because we're not sure, will it use the same material? Will it be a short in front of this? It's too much. So that film is a strange asterisk, you understand, in my life. I'd show it at workshops and classes, but in public, I'm not sure it has a role anymore. But there are parts of it that I still like a lot and that are quite different from this. It's a very different type of film. Anyway, so I did make that film, which allowed me to enter the material at least as much as I could in 2010. And then when Edwin died in May of 2011, I said, okay, now I have to dive into the material and really make the film. But I did know from the beginning that I wasn't going to put the film or structure the film in chronological order. That was something that I knew as much as I knew anything. Because those of you who are familiar with Alzheimer's, at least even a little bit, know that Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, but it's not linear. Someone can give you more lucidity 3 months from today than they gave you 3 months ago, depending on biorhythms, metabolism, how much sugar is in their system, and who knows what other mysteries of the human mind. So also I thought editorially I could create more interesting juxtapositions and more interesting ironies between Edwin at different stages of my conversations with him than if I had abided by a kind of linear chronological order. That the film would have a richer feeling and richer resonance if it was in what I think of as a kind of cubist temporality rather than a logical or linear one. Yeah. That's why I film myself entering the hallway every time I visit it.
Yeah, any more questions? Yeah. One.
Do you feel like the process of filming this, you got to know him better as his kind of mind kind of deteriorated in some ways? If that makes sense. Like, do you feel like that, like as his mind deteriorated?
That I got to know him better?
Yeah, in like a different way, I guess.
Well, I certainly got to know him in a different way. Edwin's clearly the subject of this film. And you might even say he's also the object of the film. But I never for 1 second thought, throughout the process of both shooting and editing in many ways, that he was also the co-author. It was in many ways a duet between us. Our conversations, the interaction. You can see, I show Edwin the maraca that he had played with Eli that afternoon. That he used to play with music with Eli that morning, I should say, at the end of the day. Do you remember playing with this? And Edwin says, I have no night of what I knew in the morning. You can't make that up. There's still a poet in him all the time. And whether he's giving me metaphors like that are very high level cognitive something, or whether he's making these extemporaneous poems up, once upon a time I was an interesting fellow, now I don't read or write without a bed of jello, or whether he's just making music, or talking in metered language, talking in beats, or playing with words. The vestiges, the soul, the spirit of the poet is always still there. And for me that was a revelation, and it was really inspiring. In fact, one of the most inspiring things he says to me in the film, he says, rather early on, he says, what you're doing is like making a poem. You're taking what people are thinking and turning it into, and changing it to what you want them to think. And interestingly enough also, Edwin sat all day and looked out the window. When I went, I can't look at trees or leaves or branches ever again the same way. He completely changed the way I understand the cycle of seasons, nature, trees, leaves. I'm obsessed with them now, you know? And that's just how he made sense of the world. And he somehow taught me that. And then I started to look at the trees and the leaves in particular as metaphors for memory, and you know, I started to think in grander, broader metaphorical terms about understanding memory, you know? Which challenged me, which challenged me to come up with more and different and more interesting cinematic metaphors, both sound and picture, for what it means to remember, what it's like to remember, and what it means to forget, and what it's like to forget, you know?
You think that the process of shooting the film and spending this time with Edwin, and quite intensive time, do you think that it helped you to come to terms with what was happening to him? Because it must have been really difficult for you to watch someone that you're really close to and you admire so much, that you spent time with him and you saw those flashes of, you know, brilliance and poeticness, and that, you know, do you think that that helped you get through this situation?
Well, I said before, this film's a labor of love. All my films are labors of love. This one, as much as any. And, you know, the idea that Edwin's memory loss, that Edwin's life, in effect, wouldn't just spiral outside of meaning, spiral outside of itself, you know, and that I could use the entropy of Edwin's mind and make us think anew about life and death and memory and identity, and how the past, how memory is how we time travel from the past through and into the present, and how memory is how we process the present and imagine and project and aspire to a future. You know, he's teaching me, and in turn, I'm trying to use the film not to teach you, but to make you think about these things in a different way. I mean, I know, you know, I not only think Edwin would love the film, and I don't say that hubristically, but I would like to think that he would see it as his last grand poetic gesture, you know, and I feel privileged to be in a position to actually make that possibly happen, you know. And you can only have admiration for someone who, you know, who lent himself to the project, and also who, you know, in the face of essentially losing his mind, managed to give me, and in effect give us, reports from the front, if you will, you know, to be able to throw back something that we could better understand what it's like, and do so as a poet, you know, and poet to the end.
I actually have a question for the audience before we end. How many of you could remember the 3 words in the right order? No, not too many then, okay. Alan, thank you so much for being
You're welcome.
here,
My
and thank
pleasure.
you for this gift of the film. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.